Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Monday, April 27th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, when Congress focuses on one big fight, something else usually stalls. Plus, a court decision has strengthened the CFPB's footing as debates over its future continue. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. The Agriculture Department is expanding its reorganization plans, moving hundreds of additional employees from its component agencies out of the Washington, D.C. area. Food Safety and Inspection Service employees working at its headquarters are being asked to move to states like Iowa and Georgia. USDA is also doubling down on reassignments that began under the first Trump administration. Federal News Network's Jory Heckman joins me now with more details. Jory, thanks for being here.
Hey, Terry. Great to be here.
There's a lot of moving pieces to this plan, so let's try to take them one at a time. And let's start with the Food Safety and Inspection Service. What do they do and where are they going?
Well, judging by the name, the Food Safety and Inspection Service does inspect food and ensure that it's safe. The most prominent part of its workforce are food inspectors. They make up a bulk of its workforce, and they go into meat plants and they ensure that everything is hygienic and safe and adheres to all legal requirements for that to be prepared safely. That's the most visible part of its workforce by far, but the folks that we're going to be talking about here are mostly its headquarters employees. Under this recently unveiled plan, USDA says that those Food Safety and Inspection Service headquarters employees, about 2/3 of them, are going to be packing up and moving to places like Iowa and Georgia. The reason for those places is because in Urbanville, Iowa, the agency is opening up a new National Food Safety Center, and the agency says that will serve as the primary location for administrative, technical, and support operations. Things like training, food safety education, financial operations, IT, administrative things like human resources, just to give you a general idea of things. And then what's going on in Georgia is that they're opening up a science center in Athens, Georgia, and that's going to build on an existing footprint, an existing laboratory that exists there, and that's going to bolster its capabilities in microbiology, in chemistry, and epidemiology. So they're building out its footprint beyond the Beltway, and they say that employees need to move to where the action is.
How many folks are we talking about here?
In all, a relatively small fraction of the total workforce. About 200 of these D.C. area-based headquarters employees are being asked to move, but around 100 of them will remain in the D.C. metro area, and they will stick around to do things like engage with Congress, work on policy development, and interagency coordination. So they'll still be a skeleton crew still in the D.C. area, but the agency is quick to point out, as we mentioned, that the vast majority of its workforce, about 85% of it, will not be touched, and that those food inspection employees, they will not be asked to move anywhere. They're going to continue to do their jobs the way they've done it, where they've done it.
Jory, this also is picking up some pieces that were left over from the first Trump administration's moves with USDA. Catch us up on those.
Right. So back in the first Trump administration, hundreds of employees at the Economic Research Service and the National Institute of Food and Agriculture were asked to move to Kansas City, Missouri. And this was a big reorganization back then. Since that first Trump administration, under the Biden administration, a lot of those moves were wound back. People were brought back to the D.C. area. They moved outside of Kansas City. Generally speaking, the impact of that relocation was no longer in effect. But now under the second Trump administration, USDA is doubling down. They're saying that more ERS and NIFA employees are going to be moving to Kansas City. And they said that for the employees under that original 2019 move who have gone elsewhere, that they're going to be going back to Kansas City as well. And To further broaden this out, the National Agricultural Statistics Service will also be sending employees outside of the Beltway, but they won't be going to Kansas City. They will be going to a regional office in St. Louis, and some other agency employees may also be going to other regional offices, but that part is to be determined.
This approach seems to really scatter a lot of the headquarters across the country instead of consolidating them in a single place. What is USDA offering as the rationale for all of these bits and pieces to move?
The two pieces we've heard from USDA is, one, they want to move employees closer to where their customers are. In a lot of cases, that's farmers, that's ranchers, that's people who are connected to agricultural in the agricultural industry. The other piece is that it is about cost. That they say that the cost of living in the DC metro area is higher. These agencies, of course, pay out a higher locality pay to these employees compared to some other parts of the country. And they say that they can do their job more effectively and more cheaply in other parts of the country. However, this doesn't really account for the considerable cost it will take for employees to either move their families, move their stuff across the country. That is an expensive undertaking. That is something that has stalled previous moves in the past for agencies. The other thing here is, if these employees don't move, which is often the case, it's what we saw with the NIFA and ERS moves, more than half the employees chose to quit rather than relocate, then you're hiring entirely new people, and that is also expensive.
Jory, you mentioned the relocation consideration. In the first Trump administration, as you said, a lot of folks did quit rather than move. Is that the same environment? I mean, there's been so much churn in the federal workforce. Are people's calculus still the same?
It's hard to say. What we've seen in the past is that is the case, that you are going to see a lot of attrition. You are going to see a lot of people say, no, thank you, I'm going to find a job elsewhere rather than move with my job halfway across the country. Every agency is different. We have seen some attrition with not just the USDA moves, but of course with the Interior Department. They moved the Bureau of Land Management headquarters under the first Trump administration to Colorado. Some of that was also unwound after the first Trump administration. So it remains to be seen what kind of attrition rate we'll see with these particular moves. But let's remember that USDA is also looking at other moves beyond what we're talking about here. Last year, USDA announced that it was going to move about half of its headquarters employees out of the DC metro area and relocate them to 5 hubs across the country. And also, more recently, the Forest Service announced a multi-part reorganization. What that's going to mean is that it's going to move its headquarters from D.C. to Salt Lake City, Utah. It's going to mean potentially a significant closure of research facilities, about 3/4 of those. And the third and final part is moving its wildland fire personnel and programs from its agency to a consolidated agency with the Interior Department called the Wildland Fire Service. Now, the Interior Department moved ahead with its end of that reorg. However, USDA has not, and that's because Congress didn't put up the money for this fiscal year to do that reorganization. They say they need a now congressionally mandated study, someone to come in, take a look, see the pros and cons of this plan, and whether they should actually go ahead with it.
Well, speaking of Congress, Jory, are you hearing anything from members of Congress? Are they concerned about this USDA reorganization plan? And even if they were, would it matter?
Well, this is, I guess, a case where all politics are local. In cases where it's a congressperson or senator that is gaining federal jobs, they might be happy to receive those. And we have seen some statements to that effect where the people who stand to gain jobs in all of this, they are happy about this. The people who are losing jobs are concerned about this. But overall, this is a huge disruption for the lives of these federal employees. Either way, they're looking at uprooting their families, uprooting their lives. These are often mid-career or senior employees being asked to do this. That's one alternative. The other alternative is that they find jobs elsewhere. One thing we have heard from USDA's Deputy Secretary, he told lawmakers last year that he expects there will be a higher uptake on moves because there have been mass reductions in the federal workforce concentrated in the D.C. area. And he says that with a higher than usual unemployment rate, people are going to think twice trying to find a new job in this area.
That's Federal News Network's Jory Heckman. Jory, thanks for bringing us the story.
Thanks, Terry.
You can find all the details at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, when Congress focuses on one big fight, something else usually stalls. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network.
Tune in Tuesdays at 10:30 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. for the Innovation in Government Show, sponsored by Carasoft. Hear from the industry leaders advancing the technology shaping how agencies modernize, secure operations, and deliver better services. Innovation in Government covers what is changing now, what is working from cybersecurity and cloud to data, AI, and emerging technologies. Listen to Innovation in Government, Tuesdays at 10:30 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. on Federal News Network. Search Innovation in Government.
Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. The budget resolution and reconciliation process is absorbing much of Congress's attention, staff time, and political oxygen. That focus is crowding the calendar for core governing work, including upcoming appropriations and must-do bills. Here to break down how the current focus reshapes the rest of the legislative calendar is Deputy News Director at Bloomberg Government, Lauren Duggan. Lauren, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
It's never a dull week in your corner of the world. Let's start with the budget resolution, DHS funding, and reconciliation. And what the heck is a votorama?
Well, votorama is when the Senate stacks up these votes, usually on amendments to a reconciliation bill or a budget resolution, and they're often a chance for the two parties to put each other on the spot on political issues. A lot of what we saw last week were affordability amendments offered by Democrats, peeling off a couple of Republican votes here and there, but most of these things fell along party lines. The only one I think that was adopted was about stopping illegal immigrants, and that was coming from Lindsey Graham, and everybody voted for that one, so that one was adopted. But that's to the budget resolution, which is the first step in the process of passing a reconciliation bill, because you need the resolution, then the bill. And we saw the Senate get that done overnight, Wednesday into Thursday. And the big question is, will the House be able to do that as well sometime this week? That's certainly what Republican leaders are hoping.
What are the main provisions in this budget resolution?
So most of the budget resolution parts don't matter. What's at the heart of it is this instruction to two committees to write legislation to fund Immigration and Customs Enforcement and the Border Patrol. Those are the two elements that were removed from the DHS spending bill that had kind of ping-ponged around before the Easter spring break that they took. So they need to first adopt this resolution, then get the committees to write the bill, and then move forward there. The issue we might run into is some members want more than just this ICE and Border Patrol funding. They are being told there might be another reconciliation bill, but I'm not sure that everybody believes there's either enough time or political will to get that done, and we'll see if leaders can thread that needle to get them to adopt this and then move forward on the spending bill, and then maybe coming back for another round, which again would take a lot of time.
Well, the spending bill itself, the legislation, has got to take some time to craft.
It would. I mean, they kind of know what they're trying to do, right? Funding for these two elements of DHS for a few years. They could probably write that pretty quickly, and then they just need to process it. If they got to that point, they have to get this document, the first document, the budget resolution, adopted by the House first. And that's not going to be a slam dunk just because of the competing priorities.
We heard Secretary Mullins say last week he's got enough money for one more round of paychecks for DHS. Is that adding any urgency to the conversation?
It may. I think that people have seen what the administration has been able to do through its executive provisions and also using some of the ICE and Border Patrol money that was provided in last year's major reconciliation bill. So getting this skinny reconciliation bill through, getting the then DHS bill, which is still pending to cover the rest of the department. Those two things are necessary, but they're sort of in a sequence that needs to move, and we'll have to see if that train can really start pulling out over the course of the week.
And are there any hard and fast calendar deadlines in this process that will really tell us whether they're going to make it or not?
June 1 is on the calendar because that's when Donald Trump said he wanted the bill done by, not just the resolution, but the actual legislation. So we'll see if they can get that done. They are due to be out the week after this for a 1 week break, then come back and kind of have a busy couple of weeks before the Memorial Day break. So if they can get all these things lined up, get everybody to agree on the GOP side, they can probably move this forward. But that's a tight timeline.
It really is. And on top of that, we are moving into 2027 appropriations. We've heard some hearings. We've seen some bills make it out of committee. Where are we at in what used to be called normal order or regular order?
Well, the budget request came late, but Congress wasted no time once they got back from their spring recess to start having the hearings. And there's still a lot more of those to go, even as they move the bills. We've seen 2 get through the House full committee, 2 more through subcommittee, and I think we'll see some more full committee and subcommittee action this week. The timetable that appropriators laid out could have every bill done by the end of June, at least through committee. And then they'll talk about, I think, what to do on the floor and how quickly to move those. But really, they're trying to lay down a marker in the House for eventual negotiations that include the Senate and that will include the White House. So some movement there and pretty fast and furious and a quick pace on that. But that's for 27, even as we're still wrapping up this 26 action for the Homeland Security Department.
Well, how much does the uncertainty around DHS funding and the potential of 1 or 2 more reconciliation bills over the course of the summer impact the conversations of the 2027 appropriations?
I think it's feeding into it a little bit, but the appropriators work is separate from the reconciliation work. Different committees involved, budget writing the resolution, and then the Judiciary and Homeland committees writing the bill itself that will then go through budget perhaps. So the appropriators can move on their own. There are big questions left about Homeland and Defense, which may leave those till later in the process in the appropriations front. What are they doing with Homeland? Do they need to fund ICE or CBP, or have those been taken care of? And for Defense, they're still coming to grips with the $1.5 trillion request and the additional documents that came out last week from the Pentagon about that. So I could see those waiting until the end, but they're moving on not necessarily uncontroversial bills. Financial Services has a lot of the government agencies in it, and that one moved through committee. We saw Milcon VA, which is usually pretty bipartisan, and was coming out of the House. So they're making progress and maybe leaving the toughest questions till the end.
Lauren Duggan is Deputy News Director at Bloomberg Government. Lauren, let's leave appropriations and money for a minute and talk about the rest of the legislative agenda, because FISA, which we've touched on several times, is back at center stage.
It is. They gave themselves 10 days, and that 10 days is going to be up on Thursday. There's another proposal that will go through the House Rules Committee. They'll try to get it on the floor, try to get enough support on it. I think it's 3 years with some tweaks in it, different than the proposals that they dealt with a couple weeks ago, which was the 18-month administration proposal. That didn't go anywhere. And then a 5-year with some changes that didn't go anywhere. So they're trying to work this through. FISA is not a party line issue. It sort of unites the civil libertarian and civil liberties wings of both parties, and then some, other groups within the parties as well. So when you have those dividing lines, it's hard because the policy questions and the procedure to get to those can sometimes be different coalitions, and they have to navigate that. So we'll see what they can do there in the House and in the Senate. There's going to be a tight timeline on that as well. As they're trying to count heads on the budget, they'll have to count heads on that as well.
What are the real sticking points on getting to agreement on FISA?
A lot of it comes down to warrants and kind of trust of the government with this process, and where there is disagreement and where there's this coalition seeking change. Again, it can be Democrats and Republicans in both chambers who might not see eye to eye on very much else, but they see eye to eye on this. So if they can get to some language that gives them some maybe reassurance that the warrants, or that these things aren't being abused in their eyes, that might allow them to move forward. So the nature of that language is pretty tricky, and getting to the right spot will be as much a science as an art here.
Speaking of science and art, let's talk about agriculture. The Farm Bill. That's usually one that manages to make it through in a pretty bipartisan way. It's coming back to the floor.
The House is taking up its version that the Agriculture Committee put out a few weeks ago. This has been delayed a few years. They've been extending it a year at a time, and they're trying to do something with this year. Several of the programs in the Farm Bill were dealt with in the Reconciliation Bill last year. The One Big Beautiful Bill touched those programs as well, in some ways making cuts to SNAP and some of the nutrition programs that are a part of that bill, along with the farm support. So we'll see if they can get enough support to get this bill over the line as well. If they get it through the House, they still have to find a version in the Senate and reconcile there. Maybe they can get that done over the course of the year. That's probably a priority for the agriculture state members who would like to see that wrapped up. Again, it's been delayed a couple of years, and they'd like to rewrite key provisions there too. So.
I want to wrap up on an issue that, for me, kind of captures the zeitgeist of what's going on the Hill, and it is Senate confirmations. We've seen a number of senior folks leave the administration lately for a variety of reasons. We've heard people pulling their nominations because they've been sitting for over a year waiting for confirmation. And now we have comments coming out of the Senate to the administration saying, if anybody's going to leave or you're going to fire anybody, do it soon. What is going on, and why is this issue kind of coming to a head now?
Well, the personnel changes, we've had a couple cabinet secretaries leave, and then we've had some people pull out, like you said, and some people might move forward. Kevin Warsh, who was nominated for the Fed with the end of the DOJ investigation on Friday and shifting to Inspector General, maybe his can move forward. But there's a political reality, and that's people are worried about the November elections. And if the Republicans were to lose control of the Senate, they would lose the keys to that confirmation process being in their hands. So there's some concern about that. Getting people through as quickly as possible will be a goal this year, or they'll have to turn to some acting positions, as we've seen in the past in both administrations. In Trump and Biden, we saw some acting folks hang on for a long time or switch around. So, but if you're going to get them through, they'll probably need to move pretty quickly to get them through and see if the committees can get through the work while they're also doing all these other legislative things at the same time. It's no shortage of things to tackle.
I think my favorite quote was from Senator Tillis, which said, "Do the math. There aren't that many days between now and then."
There are not.
I've been speaking with Lauren Duggan. He's Deputy News Director at Bloomberg Government. Lauren, thanks so much for this quick run through.
Thank you.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, updating aviation consumer protections is one piece of a broader question about how the federal government prepares for large-scale travel and tourism demands. But first, a court decision has strengthened the CFPB's footing as debates over its future continue. You're listening to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. A recent court ruling requiring continued funding of CFPB gives the organization room to keep carrying out its mission despite ongoing pressure from the White House and Congress. We'll examine how the decision affects the Bureau's day-to-day operations and longer-term outlook with Senior Counsel at Ballard Spahr, Alan Kaplinsky. Mr. Kaplinsky, thank you so much for joining me.
Terry, it's my pleasure.
You are one of the most knowledgeable people about the CFPB. It was one of the Trump administration's first targets last year, but a recent court decision may upend some of the reorganization that they've put in place. A federal judge has ruled that the CFPB must continue to request funding through the Federal Reserve. So many people may not know how CFPB is funded. Walk us through that process and what the basis of the court decision was.
Sure. So, Terry, the CFPB was created as part of the Dodd-Frank Act of 2010. And you'll recall that the Dodd-Frank Act was enacted in response to the economic meltdown that had occurred around 2008, roughly, during that period. And it was a period when there was definitely a lot of anti-bank feeling throughout the country, and particularly among the Congress folks and the senators in Washington. And they enacted this huge bill, the Dodd-Frank Act, that contained a very important provision that created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That was actually a brainchild of Elizabeth Warren. She had written in effect, a law review article several years before that in the University of Pennsylvania, laying out her ideas. It was created with, I would say, not a lot of input from the banks because there was a lot of anti-bank feeling. And in order to purportedly insulate this new agency from being attacked by congressmen and Republicans every time that it needed to obtain funds for its operations, they created this pretty unique funding structure that said that they would be funded by the Federal Reserve Board. And then here's the important language: out of the combined earnings of the 12 Federal Reserve banks in the country. Okay? That's how it got funded. The idea was they would not have to go hat in hand to Congress every year begging for money. The problem occurred when interest rates started to soar. This is after the enactment. The bill was enacted in 2010, and rates started going up about 3 or 4 years ago, roughly, and going up very, very rapidly. And all of a sudden, before anybody knew it, the Federal Reserve banks collectively were losing a lot of money. And the statute said that they could only be funded out of collective earnings. And so the question was, with all these losses that they were suffering, where were the earnings? Most people felt, including myself, that earnings meant profits. It didn't mean revenues, okay? And as I said, the Federal Reserve System was losing billions and billions of dollars. And there was what I consider to be a pretty good argument that it could not be funded, that the CFPB is essentially would have to be put on hold for a period of time until after the Federal Reserve's banks started making money again, as interest rates started declining. And so that was the lead up to this case. And this important decision by Judge Davila basically rejected the argument that had been made by acting director Vogt of the CFPB. He just didn't buy the argument. He said there were multiple definitions of earnings, and that earnings in this context really meant revenues, because it didn't make sense that Congress would have wanted to subject the CFPB to the great uncertainty of how much the Federal Reserve banks were going to actually earn or make in the way of profits during each year. And he directed the CFPB to start making requests for funding. So the leadership of the CFPB and the Trump administration gave up that argument. I mean, as a result, they have not taken an appeal of that case. I don't think they will. There was an earlier decision in the District of Columbia in another lawsuit brought by the labor unions representing the CFPB employees. And the same issue came before Judge Amy Berman Jackson, and she also reached the same conclusion that the administration's argument just didn't hold any water, and that they were obligated to seek funding, and they couldn't use that as an excuse for shutting down the CFPB, because that was basically what the administration has wanted to do since the Trump administration began. And they came upon this argument, which honestly, if they had made it a lot earlier and listened to some of the people like me and Professor Hal Scott, Professor Emeritus at Harvard Law School, maybe that argument would have succeeded, but they were very late to seize upon the argument. And I think, although the courts didn't say this, I think that that's in large part why the administration has now lost that argument twice. And they've now thrown in the towel. That's the important point. They're no longer going to seek to have or to shut down the agency.
I'm speaking with Alan Kaplinsky. He's senior counsel at Ballard Spahr. So I want to circle back to 2 points that you made. One, the fight isn't just about money. It's about independence here and how to keep the CFPB as an independent organization. And two, it allows them to request funding, but it doesn't seem to place any obligation on the Federal Reserve to actually provide funding.
Oh, no, it actually requires the Federal Reserve to honor requests. It doesn't give them any leeway. One of the arguments made by Judge Davila was if the Fed thought that earnings meant profits and that they could only fund the CFPB out of profits, then the Fed could have done something. He didn't like the idea that the CFPB, which is a different agency, was doing accounting for the Federal Reserve System. Federal Reserve System, according to him, they could do their own accounting, and they didn't think that earnings meant profits, that instead it meant revenues.
Do you draw any conclusions from this ruling about the independence of other organizations who may be funded in different ways?
As I said, this is a rather unique, a very, very unique way of funding an agency. It had never really been done before in this manner. There are a number of agencies that are self-funded, like the U.S. Post Office. They get revenues from stamps, et cetera. And there are a lot of agencies that are self-funded that don't have to go to Congress. But this is a unique situation, and I don't think it has any real importance in terms of how other agencies get funded.
And what impact do you think it will have on the actual operations of CFPB going forward?
Well, yeah, and that's a really important question, Terry, because the fight isn't over yet. Although the CFPB has conceded that they have got to continue to request funding, the only thing that they have to do is to request funding for statutorily required functions of the agency. They don't have to do what was done by the director under the Biden administration, who had a totally different view of how the agency would be run. And you had a much larger budget than the budget that Vote is trying to live within. And that is still being litigated. Vote has put together a workforce reduction plan, a revised one, where he is slashing the number of employees of the CFPB that used to be around 1,700 employees at the end of Biden's term. He's proposing it be reduced to a little over 500. And the consumerists in the country are claiming that's not enough money to perform the functions that need to be performed to protect consumers. And the industry is saying that is enough money. Nobody requires, the courts cannot micromanage how an agency gets run. And each administration can decide agency by agency whether they feel that it's overstaffed. There's certain things that were discretionary functions that no longer wants to do. So now this litigation will continue. I would say it's going to take a while longer to come to an end, but at the end of the day, the Trump administration will be successful in drastically reducing the number of employees, drastically reducing the amount of consumer protection enforcement that goes on, and the supervision of regulated institutions. So they'll achieve their objective. It's just taking them a long time to get there, really because they made a mistake at the beginning. And the mistake was coming out and saying, we're going to shut down this agency. And there's a little problem with that. The agency was created by Congress, and the executive doesn't have the right to just eliminate an agency.
I've been speaking with Alan Kaplinsky. He's senior counsel at Ballard Spahr. I really appreciate your insight into this issue. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Terry.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next, updating aviation consumer protections is one piece of a broader question about how the federal government prepares for large-scale travel and tourism demands. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. As the United States prepares to host the World Cup and the Olympics, attention is turning to how federal agencies plan for passenger experience and tourism capacity. A recent House-passed aviation bill highlights those connections in a tangible way. Representative Dina Titus from Nevada joins me now to discuss the issue. Congresswoman Titus, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure.
You have introduced a bill that has just passed the House to modernize ACPAC, the Aviation Consumer Protection Advisory Committee. For folks who may not follow aviation policy closely, what is the role of that organization inside the Department of Transportation?
Well, it was created back in 2012, and it's under the Department of Transportation, but more specifically under the FAA. And it was designed to promote protection for citizen interests for the consumer, so to be sure that people have the best traveling experience possible. Now, I represent Las Vegas, and of course, tourism is our lifeblood, so we want to be sure that their trip is good from start to finish, and ACPAC is the way that helps to make that possible. You have sitting on that board representatives from different aspects of the industry, whether it is airlines, hotels, everybody who's kind of an expert in travel. Some members are voting members, some are just advisory members, but they all report back to the FAA.
Well, the flying public has had a variety of experiences lately.
That's right.
Maybe not all of them good. What perspective did you see missing from the ACPAC structure that could help better address consumer experience?
Well, there are all kinds of things that people experience, like you just referred to, that make a trip unpleasant. How suddenly you have another charge, or your plane gets canceled. How do you get a refund? Your luggage gets lost. All those things are just little parts of a trip that if you're not in the travel industry, you may not know how to make it work. And that's why you need those experts at the table. Who was missing were the ticket agents. Now, you still have ticket agents who do $1 billion worth of business last year, booked travel for families, for vacation, for conferences. And so they weren't able to have a vote on that commission, even though they certainly are experts kind of from soup to nuts when you book a whole trip for somebody. So we thought they should have more of a voice and a vote.
When you think about what ticket agents bring to the conversation, what do you think they see in real time that some of those other policymakers might miss?
Well, everybody kind of gets siloed sometimes. The hotels will see one thing. Airlines will see something else. Sometimes their interests are contradictory. Airlines may want to charge you more and somebody else may not. And so I think if you have a ticket agent who's responsible for doing the whole trip and has access to where you're going to stay, what you're going to do, how you're going to get there, they can see the big picture and be kind of more knowledgeable about what makes a good trip than people who are more in their own specific areas.
This organization, as you mentioned, was created in 2012. Why did you think that 2026 was really the right time to modernize its membership?
Well, I had some input from the industry, from some consumer groups as well. And you're seeing things in aviation that are challenging for the traveler. Think of a disabled traveler, for example, who has to deal with a wheelchair and have their equipment put in baggage and taken care of. And so more and more people are traveling. So that would be a new kind of customer that we need to accommodate. Also now we're seeing issues of travel with who wants to come to the United States. We've insulted a lot of our friends, and so they're looking for other places to go. We need to promote tourism to the U.S. In Nevada, all the things that are happening with the tariffs and the rhetoric and just inflation has brought our tourism down. So whatever we can do to make the experience better, I think we need to do. And also, this was a year for reauthorization of the FAA. We just did that. That was major policy. And since we're looking at the FAA, why not add this to it?
Congresswoman Dina Titus represents Nevada's 1st District. So, ma'am, this doesn't actually change ACPAC's authority or DOT's regulatory powers. So, practically speaking, how do you think adding ticket agents here, that additional voice on the panel, will improve consumer protection?
Well, I think they have more of a stake in things if they have a vote. I mean, that goes together. If you're just advisory and you can't really change the policy, there's less of a stake in what's going on there. So I think having them at the table, having their expertise, having their advice is all great, but let them actually have a say in the policy direction. And that's the way you do it, is with a vote.
Now that the bill has passed the House with bipartisan support, congratulations. What should federal agencies and aviation stakeholders be watching for as the bill moves to the Senate?
Well, we hope to get it out of the Senate. It's bipartisan. It shouldn't really be controversial. It wasn't coming out of the House. And as you know, in today's politics, that's very rare that you can find something like that. So we're confident and we're optimistic that it will move. And there is such an emphasis on travel these days that I think that helps to kind of put a spotlight on it. Also, though, I might just mention that this committee hasn't met under the Trump administration. And so that's something else that we're doing on the side, is trying to encourage them not just to have the voting member, but let's have a meeting. Let's talk about these issues because they are increasingly important, and we want to encourage the administration to do that.
And how has the administration responded to that encouragement?
Well, they haven't had a meeting since August of 2024, and so they haven't responded yet, but that doesn't mean we quit trying. I wouldn't be in this business if I weren't an optimist.
You've talked a couple of times here about the impact on Las Vegas of different sorts of disruptions in the tourism industry. You've also worked on legislation aimed at helping tourism-dependent regions build economic resilience. When you think about that, how important is it for federal development programs to recognize tourism as core infrastructure?
Oh, I think it's very important. I'm the Democratic chair of the Tourism Caucus here in Congress. And in the past, tourism has kind of been like a little stepchild. People don't realize the impact that it has on tax revenue, on job employment, on investment in bricks and mortar in a community. And it goes far beyond, let's say, the Las Vegas Strip. Lots of small businesses provide ancillary services in the tourism industry. And now there's a big emphasis, too, on outdoor tourism. So let's not just go inside and play slots. Let's also go out and hike in Valley of Fire. And so all of those things, I think, are important to bring tourism back. And when people are not coming, if it's difficult to get a visa, if they worry that they won't be able to get in or get out once they come, or if you're insulting them, they'll go somewhere else. All of those are, I think, practical and big-time considerations that everybody should realize. Well, think about this. No matter where you live, you're going to have something that somebody wants to visit. Now, it may be a historical place. It might be a natural scenery kind of area. It might be the world's largest ball of string. There is a place like that. Or it might be the Las Vegas Strip, but everybody has something. And so somebody's going to come and visit it, and you should recognize the importance of tourism as a part of the economy. And when you do economic development, develop things that promote that tourism, whether it's infrastructure that you need to get people in and out of the area, whether it's support for small businesses that do provide those ancillary services. Those are the kind of things that economic development can do that tie to tourism.
Are there particular initiatives that your caucus is hoping to move forward?
Well, right now, the talk in the caucus is just about the decline in tourism, especially from the international scene. What can we do to make that better? And especially in light of the two big international events that are coming, the World Cup and the Olympics. So those are kind of the challenges that we're looking at that are pretty much on the horizon.
I've been speaking with Congresswoman Dina Titus. She represents Nevada's 1st District. Ma'am, thanks so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. President Trump's pick to lead the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency is withdrawing from consideration. Sean Planke was first nominated to serve as CISA director last March. But after a long wait in the Senate, Planke says he needs to step back, leaving the cyber agency without a permanent director for the foreseeable future. For more, Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday joins me now. Justin, thanks for being here.
Good to be with you, Terry.
People were pretty bullish on Sean Planke. What made him ultimately withdraw from consideration to be the CISA director?
Yeah, it's such a curious case here because Planke had wide support for this role. He was not controversial at all in terms of his ability to lead the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, but the Senate's nomination and confirmation process ultimately proved too high of a hurdle for various reasons. And he ultimately, in a letter to the White House Presidential Personnel Office last week, asked to have his nomination withdrawn. He said, after 13 months since my initial nomination, it's become clear that the Senate will not confirm me. He said, my wife and young family are owed greater certainty and work-life balance from their husband and father. And so that's very understandable on the face of it. And, he asked to have his nomination removed so that President Trump can nominate someone else to lead CISA. And that's ultimately where we're at 13 months after he was first picked.
What were the holds going on in the Senate?
There's a lot going on there. So I'll start with the initial hold from Senator Ron Wyden last year. And this more directly related to CISA. So CISA had drawn up a report almost 4 years ago now on telecommunications gaps within security gaps within telecommunications environments. This came to a head with the kind of revelations around Salt Typhoon hacking into U.S. and global telecom networks. And Wyden had argued CISA should release that report. It's unclassified, but CISA had not released it. And he put a hold on Planke's nomination to force CISA to release that report. And as far as I can tell, he never really released that hold, even though CISA had said they would ultimately release the report at some point. So there was that issue. Even messier, perhaps, was while he was waiting for confirmation, Sean Planke was serving as a senior advisor to the Coast Guard leader within the Department of Homeland Security. Planke is a former Coast Guard service member, and he was helping to kind of advise the Coast Guard on their Force Design 2028 initiative and that whole overhaul and reform effort over the last year. That got Planke into some issues with some senators, most notably Florida's Rick Scott, over just some of the decisions the Coast Guard made around canceling shipbuilding contracts. And so Rick Scott reportedly placed a hold on Planke for that reason late last year. And then more recently, there's been concerns that Planke actually held a position with a company that does business with the Coast Guard while he was serving as in that senior advisor role to the Coast Guard. This came up from Representative Hillary Scholten from Michigan late last month. And so there was just a lot swirling around Sean Planke and some issues that he just ultimately couldn't overcome in the Senate, especially related to that Coast Guard advisor role and not related to his fitness to be the CISA director.
What's been the general reaction to his withdrawal?
From the cybersecurity community, disappointment. I think a lot of people were hoping that Planke could right the ship at CISA, so to speak, after a difficult year. Everyone mostly agrees that CISA had a pretty difficult year, losing 1,000 people, about a third of its staff, including many senior leaders. The Trump administration has proposed multiple budget cuts for CISA, and Congress has been a little frustrated, both Republicans and Democrats, about what is the new direction for CISA under this administration, because CISA still has quite a bit of bipartisan support given its cybersecurity mission. And so a lot of disappointment. House Homeland Security Committee ranking member Benny Thompson put out a statement saying that he hopes the Trump administration quickly nominates someone else to serve in this role. Benny Thompson actually did not raise any issues with Planke's nomination, but he hopes Trump will pick someone else because it is such an important job for those cybersecurity leaders.
So where does this leave CISA today? Is there anybody in charge over there?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, they've lost a lot of staff. They do have a political appointee in place. Nick Anderson joined CISA as Executive Assistant Director for Cybersecurity last September, and he is now serving as Acting Director of the agency. And he has pretty good support from, folks within Congress and within the cybersecurity community. But again, he wasn't picked to be the director of this agency. And he doesn't have a lot of other kind of political leadership in place alongside him. There's a lot of acting leadership when you look further down the org chart at CISA right now. And so it's a difficult spot. They're also in the middle of a shutdown. Since February 14th, the entire Department of Homeland Security has been operating under a shutdown. That situation hits CISA particularly hard, with the majority of its staff being furloughed during a shutdown, at least up until last month when Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin recalled furloughed DHS employees. But in any case, CISA is kind of in this really weird spot with kind of a void of political leadership, operating during a shutdown, and big questions about its future under the Trump administration.
That's Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday. Justin, there's lots to watch here for this important mission. Thanks for bringing us the story.
Absolutely. Thank you, Terry.
You can find the full details at federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editor is Stephanie Wright. As AI continues to deliver real impacts across the government, what can you learn from agencies at the forefront? Join Federal News Network's AI and Data Exchange this week, Wednesday, April 29th and Thursday, April 30th at 1 p.m. Eastern, to hear how agencies are scaling AI effectively and securely. Register today at federalnewsnetwork.com. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.